the winner of the Chris Eubank Jr. Arthur Abraham fight will take on Avni Yildirim in the quarterfinal of the World Boxing Super Series super middleweight version of the tournament. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Chris Eubank Jr. I'll just give you a quick rundown on his statistics. He's 27 years old. He's from the United Kingdom. He stands 5'11" tall. He has a record of 25 fights, 24 wins, 1 loss, 19 knockouts. He is currently the International Boxing Organization World Super Middleweight Champion. His last fight is when he won that particular belt against an individual called Reynold Quinlan from Australia. His biggest fights, I guess, were his loss to Billy Joe Saunders. That was for, I think, the European middleweight title. This fight is at super middleweight. Eubank Jr. is now campaigning at super middleweight, but his loss was at middleweight to Billy Joe Saunders. Other notable fights would be Dmitry Chudinov. That's when he won an interim version of the WBA belt. Again at middleweight. Also, Spike O'Sullivan was one of his notable fights. He managed to stop O'Sullivan in 7 rounds. Nick Blackwell was a very good fight. That was for the British middleweight title. And again, his last fight against Reynold Quinlan. So that's Chris Eubank Jr. He is a boxer puncher, a volume guy. He doesn't have a particularly concussive punch, but he does have a lot of knockouts on his record because he tends to wear people down with sheer volume. He's fast. He's very athletic. He's got a great engine. Against Chris Eubank Jr., unless you've got an incredible defense, then you're going to get hit quite a bit. And that's really the key to beating Eubank Jr. is to minimize the amount of times this guy hits you. Because there are very few people that are going to be able to keep up with Eubank Jr. in terms of punch volume. He just keeps throwing and keeps throwing and keeps throwing. And particularly with the uppercuts and hooks, he's very prolific. And when he lets the combinations go, they can be blistering. I mean, if you remember in the Gary O'Sullivan fight, he was just reeling off all kinds of punches on O'Sullivan. And O'Sullivan was overwhelmed by the speed, the velocity, and the frequency that the shots were raining down on him. The same in the Nick Blackwell fight. So yeah, he's a volume guy who uses a lot of hand speed and combinations to overwhelm people and wear them down. He can box on the back foot. He showed that in the Nick Blackwell fight. But he prefers when fighters come at him. He prefers to face pressure guys rather than guys who give him a side profile like a Billy Joe Saunders and actually box. He's a little more uncomfortable when he has to go in there with a slick boxer. Now, his opponent or potential opponent, because we don't know that Eubank Jr. has beaten, we don't know for a fact if Eubank Jr. is going to beat Arthur Abraham. Most of us are picking him, but this is boxing, anything can happen. His potential opponent, Avni Yildirim, is from Turkey. He is 25 years old, so 2 years younger than Eubank Jr. He's unbeaten. He's had 16 fights, 16 fights, 16 wins, 10 wins by knockout. He hasn't faced anybody of note, really, Yildirim. Looking at his record, he's fought people like Marco Antonio Paraban in his last fight. He went 12 rounds, won a unanimous decision in that fight. Now, Paraban is somebody who was knocked out by James DeGale a few years back, if you may remember. I think it was in 2 rounds or something like that. DeGale managed to get him out of there. So the fact that Yildirim was going the distance with Paraban, maybe not so impressive. Although Paraban, prior to being stopped by DeGale, was known as a tough guy. It was surprising the way DeGale was able to get him out. Other than that, on Yildirim's record, there really isn't too many people that you would recognize. Aaron Pryor Jr., maybe. He won a 10-round decision over him last year in 2016. But other than that, who is there? Glenn Johnson. Didn't even realize he fought him. He won a decision over Glenn Johnson in 2015. I mean, Glenn Johnson, as old as the pyramids at this point. Very, very old and past it. So that is Avni Yildirim. I really don't know much about him. He stands 5'11", as I say, from Turkey. I believe he's a come forward pressure fighter. I really haven't watched him fight like that, so I couldn't tell you too much about him stylistically. But I believe, like most Turkish fighters, he's a pressure fighter. He likes to come forward. One of his claims to fame is that he was the guy that knocked out James DeGale's tooth in sparring in the build-up to DeGale's fight with Badou Jack, because we all know that DeGale had a tooth missing at the end of the Badou Jack fight. We all assumed, or most of us assumed, that it was Badou Jack's work that did that, his punches alone, but in fact it was a fake tooth. It was a false tooth that came out in the Badou Jack fight, or at least partially a false tooth, which came out, and it was Yildirim who had originally knocked that tooth out in sparring a couple of weeks before the Badou Jack fight took place. Yildirim has made a big deal about that on social media and in the media in general, calling himself the tooth smasher or whatever it is, the dentist. So, you got to say what you got to say to get your name up there and get people talking about you. And that's what Yildirim has been doing. I'm not sure how good he is. I'm not sure how formidable a puncher he is. 10 knockouts out of 16 wins wouldn't suggest that he was a devastating puncher, particularly against this level of opposition, because he's been fighting, fringe contenders and has-been kind of guys. I don't want to say journeyman, because most of the guys he's been facing, particularly for the last, well, actually all the way through his career, come to think of it, other than his first 2 fights, he's been fighting people with winning records all the way. So his level of opposition hasn't actually been that bad, but there are guys who have been stopped before, people like Aaron Pryor Jr. and Marco Antonio Paraban, who Yildirim didn't manage to stop. It doesn't necessarily mean he can't punch. Maybe he just don't have the ring craft or the smartness to be able to land the big shots necessary to take guys like that out. But certainly, if he is a very hard puncher, he doesn't appear to be a particularly prolific puncher. And by prolific, I mean he doesn't appear, based on his record, to have the ability to land those knockout blows on a consistent basis in fights. So, it all remains to be seen. Stylistically, you would imagine that he is ideal for Eubank Jr. because he likes people that come at him and throw leather. It gives him his opportunity to land his hooks and uppercuts and whatnot. It plays into Eubank Jr.'s hands. But if Yildirim is as strong as he likes to make out he is, Eubank Jr. could have problems. Eubank Jr. wasn't a particularly hard puncher at middleweight. Now at super middleweight with bigger, stronger guys, his power is going to be perhaps even less effective. So we'll see how this goes. What do you think about this fight, people? Eubank Jr. against Yildirim. Now, if Eubank Jr. doesn't beat Abraham, you get Abraham against Yildirim. Abraham, with his experience, you would imagine, should be able to take care of a pressure fighter like Yildirim. You would imagine, or at least he would have a good chance. Somebody who's going to give Abraham movement, like Ramirez, for example, who beat Abraham. That's the kind of guy who's likely to beat him. I mean, most people who have beaten Abraham have beaten him with movement, slick movement. Carl Froch beat him sticking and moving. Andre Ward beat him in similar fashion. Even guys who lost to Abraham but were winning during the fight, like Jermaine Taylor, they were doing that in similar fashion. So a guy like Yildirim who's going to come at Abraham will probably play into Abraham's hands. It might almost feel like a younger version of Abraham fighting an older version of Abraham. Would it be the younger guy with the energy and the work rate overcoming the older guy who has the superior ring IQ, knowledge, and he knows all the tricks and whatnot. He knows when to take time off in rounds. He knows when to cover up. He's more crafty and slick. Would that version of Abraham beat a younger version of himself? That potentially could be what takes place if Abraham is indeed fighting Yildirim. So an interesting matchup there, whether it's Abraham versus Yildirim or Eubank Jr. versus Yildirim. So let me know what you think in the comment section below, people. It's happening. I'm out.